All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Friends of Air Force History and Heritage webinar for November of 2021 and thankfully, 2020. I'm getting ahead of myself there. And so good morning to everyone and good afternoon to our Kiwi colleagues who are going to do the presentation today, Matthew and Michelle from Over the Ditch. Before we go on to the actual presentation, just some housekeeping. Can I ask everyone, please, during this morning's presentation, hold your questions to the end. There'll be a question and answer time available at the end. Can I also please ask you to stay on mute? As I said, while we love our animals, dogs barking in the background become very distracting. If you don't wish to be recorded into this video, turn your video off now. I know some of us are a bit shy about our looks. Now, what's the saying? You know, you've got a face for radio. I do particularly. And as I said, the recording's up and going now. Before I pass over to our presenters for today, I'd just like to make a couple of announcements about some upcoming webinars. So the last webinar for this year will be on the morning of the 4th of December, same time as now. And it's going to be delivered by Kristen Alexander. And Kristen's title, the working title we have, was For You in the War is Not Over. And Kristen's going to be covering the emotional and psychological aspects of captivity of captured Australian airmen in World War II. So that'll be a fascinating presentation. And Kristen has been studying this extensively for a long period of time, including doing her PhD on the topic. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of people having interest in that. The night before, we're actually doing a special webinar, and that's going to be on Thursday, the 3rd of December at 7 p.m. And the topic for that one is actually the launch of our next book from the History and Heritage Branch Air Force, entitled Armageddon and Okra, which is written by Dr. Lewis Fredrickson. Lewis is exploring and doing a comparison of air operations, Australian air operations over the Middle East, a century apart. So in World War I and most recently in Operation Okra. That book launch is going to be occurring from 7 p.m. with Air Vice Marshal Zed Robertson as the official guest. And then there'll probably be an hour-and-a-half webinar after that where Lewis will be talking about his research. And that book is the first in our series of what we're calling the Australian Air Campaign series that'll be coming out henceforth. So we're really proud to be actually getting that book out into the market this year. So at that point, I don't want to take up any more time from Michelle and Matthew. What I'll be doing is I'll be asking Michelle and Matthew to step forward, and they're doing a presentation today on the Royal New Zealand Air Force Museum's Imagery Collection and their project to digitise that. So with no further ado, I'll pass across to you. Who wishes to go first, Michelle or Matthew? Michelle. All right, over to you, Michelle.
Great, thanks, Fredo, and hi everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you guys today. It's a real pleasure for Matthew and I to be able to join you from over here in New Zealand, thanks to the wonders of modern technology. I think I met a few of you last year at the Excellent Publishing Symposium in Canberra, so it's really, really lovely to be in your company once again. So I'm Michelle, I'm the Communications Manager here at the Air Force Museum of New Zealand, the RNZAF Museum. I've been here for just over 12 years now, and just over half of that time was spent working alongside Matthew and our archives team, so a background in collections. I'm not going to try and talk for too long today because I know the real reason you're here is to listen to Matthew talk about our photo digitisation project. But what I'm going to do is just give you a very brief introduction to our museum for those of you who may not have visited or may not be overly familiar with who we are and what we do, and just to place Matthew's talk in context. So I'm going to have a go at sharing my screen. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. So here we go, this is us. So we are located at Wigram in Christchurch, which is on the South Island of New Zealand. For those of you who've been here, we're the largest city in the South Island, also known as the Garden City. Here in New Zealand, we don't have an equivalent of the National War or the Australian War Memorial. So we have 3 service museums who together hold the National Distributed Military Collection. So we are the National Museum for the Royal New Zealand Air Force. We opened on the 1st of April 1987, which just happened to be the 50th anniversary of the RNZAF. And we are located, as I said, at Wigram, which, as many of you will know, was the founding base of the RNZAF. So this is where our Air Force began. Military, or I should say pilot training, began here at Wigram during World War I with Sir Henry Wigram's Canterbury Aviation Company, and then the fledgling New Zealand Air Force formed here in 1921. So on the left there in that image, you can see RNZAF Base Wigram as it was in 1990. It was at that time on the outskirts of Christchurch. The base closed in 1995. And fast forward a few years to 2016, you can see that it is now being heavily developed for housing. There was the aerodrome continued to function until about 2009, when it was given over to housing. And in the 4 years since this Google Earth photo, up in that top section is now also all housing. So the city really has grown completely around us. But you can also see the large patch of land that is still retained by Defence right outside the museum. This is go back. This is the museum here. So we have a large chunk of land that is still able to operate helicopters from. So we give the odd NH90 and Sea Sprite popping in from time to time, which is always nice. So I thought the easiest way, as I say, for those of you who haven't visited us, to give you an impression of the museum is just to play a short video. I will caution this one is a couple of years old now, so there are a few things that may have changed, a few aircraft that have moved around and things in slightly different places. However, it does still give you a really good overview. So it's only about 30 seconds, so I'll just play that now. So I apologise, it does actually have sound, but it's just music, so I'll just turn it off. So it's our mosquito mission flight simulator, which is a very important, a very popular activity there at the museum. So yeah, that just gives you a whistle-stop tour of the museum. Whoopsies. There we go. Okay, so this is our mission statement. This summarises obviously the purpose of the museum, what we are and what we do, what our function is, which is very simply to preserve and present the history of New Zealand military aviation for commemoration, inspiration, learning and enjoyment. So to help achieve that mission, we have a team of around 30 paid staff covering all the key areas of the museum, including collections and research, technical conservation and restoration, public programs and education, and retail and administration. We also have a very large pool of around 75 volunteers who are split between working front of house as guides for our visitors, taking behind the scenes tours and greeting our visitors, and also in the workshops and other collections areas. We really couldn't do what we do without them. We operate as a partnership between the RNZAF, who owns the buildings and the land and fund the facilities management, infrastructure, utilities, and also pay most of the staff salaries, and the Museum Trust Board, who own the collection and have governance responsibility for the museum. We used to charge an admission fee. However, we've had free admission to the museum since 2009, essentially to remove the biggest barrier to visitation, and that's been hugely successful. We've gone from having just 30,000 visitors a year prior to 2009 to around 150,000 last year. Obviously, COVID has had an impact, but yeah, we're still well on track for some healthy visitor numbers. I mean, we've been very fortunate here in New Zealand, as most of you will know. Furthermore, one of the benefits of free admission is our visitors are far more diverse than they ever were before, with local families making up our largest demographic. So just a quick overview now of some of the key aspects of the museum. Obviously, commemoration or the memorial function of the museum is hugely important. And the RNZAF Roll of Honour takes a prominent place in our atrium. It's one of the first things that people see and one of the first things that guides and our staff talk about when they're welcoming people to the museum. We also hold an annual Anzac Day service. So in this image, you can see one of our lovely RNZAF veterans at our Anzac Day service last year, as well as observing Battle of Britain Day and Armistice Day and other Air Force related commemorations. Inspiration, we aim to inspire curiosity and interest in the RNZAF, its people and history, as well as in aviation in general. And that's achieved through a program of changing exhibitions, public programs and community events, among other things. We have an education officer on staff, Chris Davey, who you can see here on the left, who delivers curriculum-based learning experiences outside the classroom for all ages and abilities. So he takes groups from preschools through to adult learning groups, everything in between. Our booked education programs are all free. We just ask for donations if schools can manage it. And we generally have between 5,000 and 7,000, mostly children, but also some adults attending our education programs every year. And let's not forget that museums should be enjoyable and fun as well. And what could be more fun than sitting in a Spitfire, as I'm sure you'll all agree. This photo was taken at one of our popular open cockpit events, which is just one of the many public programs that our visitor experience team runs every year, from children's birthdays and holiday programs through to large open days. Of course, we wouldn't be a museum without our collection, and ours is surprisingly large and diverse. Of course, everyone usually, the aircraft are the first things they think of, but we have somewhere in the region of several 100,000 other what we call 3D objects. And that includes everything from medals, memorabilia, uniforms, spare parts and equipment. And pictured here is our objects curator, Emma, with part of our trench art and badge collection and storage. So of course, arguably the stars of the collection are of course the aircraft. We have over 30, mostly ex-RNZAF aircraft, but also a small number of type examples, plus vehicles, engines and other large objects. We apply the museum principles of preventive conservation to all our collection and have a program of detailed inspection and maintenance for our large object collection. So here you can see some of our team undertaking a routine maintenance inspection on our Hudson in situ in the galleries. We've been involved in the aircraft restoration game since the museum first began. And have completed several significant projects over the years, including the Lockheed Hudson that you saw in the previous slide, as well as a P-40 Kitty Hawk and an Airspeed Oxford. After a few years hiatus recently to focus on conserving our existing collection, we've just embarked on the next major project to rebuild an RNZAF Vickers Wildebeest biplane, which you can see here, but more on that another time. That's just a teaser. We also have an extensive archival collection, which comprises both paper-based documents and obviously an image collection. We also offer both a remote research service as well as operating a public reading room on site in our reference library that you see here. And I'm sure many of you may have engaged with that in the past. So that is the perfect segue now to introduce my esteemed colleague, Matthew, our keeper of photographs and the real person that you've zoomed in to listen to today. Matthew's worked in our archives team for more than 25 years and over that time has built up an enormous amount of knowledge about the collection that he cares for. So what he's going to talk to you about now is a project he's championed for most of his time at the museum, but only this year has been able to see to fruition. So without further ado, I am going to stop talking and hand over to Matthew, who's going to tell us all about our image digitisation project. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Let me just get mine up. Oh, come on. There we go. Why have I got that on the side? Forgive me while I battle with the technology here. Is it coming up full screen for everybody?
No, we're just seeing the slideshow speaking notes down the side. So it's, I think you've got to put into slideshow mode, Matthew.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, okay.
Well, I asked it to start slideshow from the beginning.
Matthew, are you plugged into both screens? Maybe unplug. Just use your Surface Pro.
No, that hasn't worked. Just getting my mouse back. It worked earlier on.
There we go, Matthew.
Hey, it's working now?
I'm seeing it. Yep.
Okay. Well, it's not for me, so I'll just assume that you guys can all see my second half, which is actually auto translating for me, so I'm not going to get put off by that. So, the Air Force Museum Photographic Archive, a journey to digitisation and public access. And I'm not going to insult you by spelling out everything I'm going to say. So a little bit of background to the RNZAF official negative collection held here at the Air Force Museum. What's that showing you now?
The first one.
It should be showing you something else. There, is that better?
That's better. We've got a biplane.
Okay. So here we go. A little bit of background to the RNZAF official negative collection held here at the Air Force Museum. The RNZAF had a photographic trade from the earliest days of the Air Force in New Zealand. In the 1920s and 30s, photos were taken of aircraft and training courses. The Air Force was only tiny at that stage, and not many photos were taken, and even fewer survive to this day. And the photo there is an example of a original handwritten negative register from the early 1950s, and it shows you the number of negatives which are missing or destroyed or for otherwise not in the series. As the RNZAF expanded, the photographic trade grew, but it wasn't until 1941 that large numbers of photos were taken. At the time, public relations and recruiting were the focus of the pictures, and the pictures were well exposed and well composed. As the war drew to a close, many more photographers were sent to the forward areas, and they concentrated on personnel and life in the tropics. After the war, the trade was downsized and precious few photos were taken for a couple of years. However, by 1950, the photographers were busy again, and this continues until the present day. Over the years, chemical deterioration, damage, destruction, loss, and misfiling have led to many gaps. This sounds worse than it is, and affects mainly the 1950s, but largely the series is complete. In 1987, the Air Force Museum was opened, but it wasn't until 1994 that the RNZAF official negative collection was transferred to the museum, and the transfer continued in batches over the years until now all surviving RNZAF official negatives are held at the museum. This complements the museum's donated collection of prints, albums, and moving films. People always ask me how many images we hold, and the honest answer is I don't know, something over 1 million. And this is where I enter the story, and perhaps I should introduce myself. I began working at the museum as the photographic archivist in 1994, but I'm still not the longest serving staff member. And let me introduce the team. The keeper of photographs, the photographer, the digitisation technician, the data entry technician, and the archivist. We're trying to get rid of him, he's a bit strange. In short, the photo archive is a sole charge position and all aspects are carried out by me. One of my first jobs was to enter negative descriptions into an Excel spreadsheet, and I began with the World War II Public Relations series, a run of about 8,000. In those days, if a researcher inquired about photographs, I'd make a search, photocopy prints of any that were relevant, and mailed them out with an order form. They then completed the order form and returned it to me with payment details. I retrieved the negatives and went to the darkroom and made a print, then mailed it back to the researcher. Looking back from the perspective of a digital world, this was an extremely cumbersome and time-consuming process. Luckily, the photographic archive wasn't a well-known resource and inquiry numbers were relatively low. The more work I did, however, the more well-known it became and the more research requests I received. In 1995, the then research officer began work on acquiring an image database. After assessing bids from several different solution providers, we decided on an HTML-linked Microsoft Access database run from a SQL server. Then, when I think about the other solutions offered, we definitely chose the best one. But as time and technology progressed, this became antiquated, but more on that later. And this is the results page of what it used to look like. In late 1995, when the system was introduced, it was cutting edge, and we called it the image browser. We were one of only a few institutions who had anything like it. However, because I was operating within the Defence computer system, the browser could not be accessed from outside Defence. It worked really well in its limited capacity, although it was a little slow because of the constraints of the Defence network. The original intention was to put it on the internet, but because all the software was behind the firewall, the IT boffins couldn't figure out an effective way of making it accessible to the public, while still retaining the integrity of the network. Even weekly updates to a remote clone of the database was out of the question. So, despite all its promise, it was only ever available to members of the NZDF from within the Defence IT structure. When the browser was introduced, the Defence IT policies and personnel were almost non-existent, and I held the server under a desk in my office. I did daily, weekly, and monthly backups onto removable tape drives. As Defence came up to speed with network security, they brought my server under their control, and it was removed to another site within the museum with someone else doing the backups. Eventually, the server hardware became obsolete and it was migrated to a remote Defence server. As technology progressed, SQL databases became obsolete and Defence stopped supporting them. I was given a waiver for my system, but it became less and less supportable. Meanwhile, in the photographic archive, requests for reproductions slowly moved away from prints, made by me in the darkroom, to emailed digital files. When I began, all requests were by letter, and I didn't even have a Defence email address, let alone a computer connected to a network. And if you can see in that picture, you can see the year 2000 compliant sticker on it. That's a blast from the past. In about 2005, I closed the darkroom down and moved to making prints from files. but the requirement for hard prints continued to decrease. And as technology and bandwidths increased, this became easier and easier to accomplish. This, along with obsolete image browser technology, meant that I had to think about an upgrade. It became clearer as time went on that Defence weren't interested or couldn't maintain the old SQL database. Finally, the critical piece of software that allowed me to enter new images into the browser stopped working and couldn't be fixed, and no new images were added to the browser for about 5 years. I still digitized images, but I saved them separately and they weren't searchable by anyone but me. And this is just a screenshot of one of my base folders, and you can see how small the scroll bar is at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen to give you an idea of how many files are in that folder. The research officer that I mentioned earlier was by this stage the director, and as well as giving the museum a new aircraft display building, began the process of moving the museum as a unit away from the Defence IT infrastructure. This was several years in gestation, but Defence were in support. They paid for it, and we had a wing commander from headquarters driving the project. One of the many aspects that desperately required upgrade was the imagery system, and I began my overtures in earnest. Some years before, I had looked at PhotoWare as a solution to the browser upgrade. This was partly because all new programs within the Defence IT network require to be tested and approved to operate in that environment, which is a lengthy process. I'd heard that PhotoWare was already approved, so this was a big tick in its favour. When I was asked to start looking for digital asset management software, I began looking at PhotoWare in detail. I could see PhotoWare working live on the ADF imagery website, so I was able to actively demonstrate it to management. More recently, PhotoWare is being used by more and more GLAM institutions, that's galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And they have a plugin that communicates with the Vernon collection management software, which the museum already uses. So at my recommendation, PhotoWare was purchased. Although because of budgetary constraints, several things were not included. One of them was the Vernon plugin. In early 2019, the museum's new IT infrastructure was introduced. Independent email addresses, lightning fast internet on our desktops, and cloud-based storage. I had a new system to learn and digital assets to make ready for going live. PhotoWare isn't difficult to learn, and I've described it as deceptively simple. It looks basic and it operates in a straightforward way, but the system itself is quite powerful. Keywords and metadata are integral to PhotoWare, and up to that point, I hadn't been adding much metadata to files. Therefore, all assets that are uploaded to PhotoWare require the metadata to be updated. PhotoWare staff in Sydney wrote an algorithm to bulk add the existing data from the old spreadsheet into specific fields of the new files. This is not comprehensive because I originally had only limited fields, so all files still need to be looked at, captions reread to pick up the odd mistake that crept through, and a copyright statement added, among other things. When the IT system was being developed, a second, much smaller project was underway. For years, we charged researchers for photographic reproductions, both digital and analog. The research team began looking at our pricing system and our approach to copyright. The result is that in line with the New Zealand open government policy, we moved to the Creative Commons attribution and non-commercial model. And we also ceased charging for reproductions. This removed a significant layer of administration, not only for me, but for the museum's admin staff. Throughout 2019, I continued building up the stock of photos ready to go live, and I had several online lessons with the helpful PhotoWare staff in Sydney. In November 29, I travelled to Sydney to have a one-day's in-depth training on some of the behind-the-scenes workings. And that photo is from my crappy cell phone, but it was when all of the bushfires were on, and that was smoke coming over Sydney in the city. We went live in February 2020, but I had earlier let my brother have access to give it some testing. Originally, 5,000 images were available, and it was warmly received by all who used it. There were some early comments about the way I captioned and used keywords, but these seem to be user unfamiliarity rather than anything that I could have done better. Now there are over 14,500 available to the public, which represents roughly half of 1% of the collection. But there are still tens of thousands more files which I still need to cleanse the metadata of. Now, I'm just going to make a note here that when I first drafted this talk for our original appointment a couple of months ago, I had put down now there are just over 9,000 available. So in that few months we've jumped up roughly 5,000 photos available to the public. Although Photoware has a simple interface which can be adapted to suit any website or branding, it is being widely used by the public and museum staff, and we have received good feedback from all quarters. Michelle tells me that the photographs page of the museum website is the second most landed on page on the site. We're finding photos turning up in all sorts of places for a variety of uses, with almost everyone correctly referencing the source, which in my opinion is one massive hurdle overcome. One modern day use for historic imagery is colorization. I won't bore you with my opinion of that. However, the database has produced a rich vein of material for them. All of this shows the diversity of engagement we're receiving. Digital New Zealand is a central database of databases, which accesses over 30 million assets from over 200 institutions' online collections. We even, hopefully you can see there, we even get a mention of that on their homepage, even though the number of available is a little out of date. So this is the bottom of their homepage, and we're one of the 4 sites that they show people. And just this morning, Michelle told me about this blog on the Digital New Zealand website about the convalescent depot at Rotorua, which is made up of largely from photos from our collection, but someone's written the blog about a mostly unrecognised unit in the RNZAF. I'm able to track statistics, which I'm still getting my head around, but an example is the quarter hour between 4:45 and 5 p.m. on Monday, the 2nd of October. There were 2,974 requests to the server, which is that large peak at the start of that graph. Obviously, this fluctuates depending on the time of day, but even at 2 o'clock in the morning, there are as many as 25 requests to the server. As I said earlier, I'm on my own in the photographic archive, and as a result, I don't have any formal upload strategy. If someone asks for a photo or a series of photos, I'll scan them to complete the request and upload those few. Sometimes with one frame from a short series of negatives is requested, I'll scan the whole lot. This way I get a few more scanned than usual. But the advantage is that in Photoware, many operations can be carried out in bulk. So it's often just as easy to upload and describe 10 of the same subject, location and date as it is to do just one. So finally, some thoughts about lessons I've learned. When the original browser was purchased, we were all inexperienced with this type of technology. It turned out that a critical piece of software that was hardwired into the system was only an appraisal version. It couldn't be removed or changed, and this caused many problems for the Defence IT boffins. Do your homework, ask questions and find someone else who uses it. Even though we can't know the direction that technology is moving in, we need to keep abreast of new innovations. Any solution should be open to updating as possible. The old browser was limited in its functionality and couldn't be upgraded to newer versions. And what I thought I would do now is to give you a live demonstration of the website. So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen, and I want to get so this is the live museum website now, and I see it's just changed, but down here is our photographs page, but the other way to get to it is collections and research, explore, and photographs. And the first page is a brief description, and there's also a copyright statement there with links to some of the other critical websites like the Creative Commons website, and a few FAQs at the bottom. But to go into the site, it's there. Why didn't that work, Michelle? Oh, there we go. And so that's what it looks like. Now, what I've on the left here, this is search the collection. This is everything, and these other ones are albums which I've created, which automatically put photos in. If there's a photo taken by the Hakia photo section, and I upload it and put it into the collection, it will automatically be populated into this one as well. Likewise for Whanupā, likewise Wigram, and I'm going to be creating more of those as we come along, although I don't want many more than about 8 or perhaps 10. So you can just, by clicking on that, you can start by just browsing the collection, and it's just, as I said, there's 14,731 hits available there. So that's what the number available, and click on one and you get the information over here on the left. You can either copy the link, copy the link, or you can just click on that. It gives you the date of it, gives you the rights statement, and I'm not sure why we even have camera details, but I can change that. And here in the top right, you can download that image at full resolution if you want. I'm going to go back to here. So if I do a search on that, let's see if we can find Fredo's photo. So that's everything which has the keyword RNZAF, and there's a bunch of things here, and you can see as I'm scroll down, I get to the bottom, it just gives me more as I go. So it's just there's plenty of hits available there. It's showing me that there are 285. There are 81 of them were taken in the Hakia section. 27 of them were taken by the Whanupā section. These ones here are the F-111 that came to grief in the Manukau Harbour. This one here you might be interested in, which is a Lincoln, which came to New Zealand in 1953 for an air pageant. And if I and let's say, I'm going to go back to that search, and let's say I want to let's go back to everything. Okay, I want everything RNZAF, but I also want to have everything at Hakia. So I just type a space and, oh goody. Okay, I want to do that a different way. Come on. There we go. So I've got this one here. So the keywords over on the left-hand side, if I want to say everything which is of this particular aircraft, for example, and I'm hoping there's going to be more than one, which there isn't, it'll search everything with that keyword. So let's say if I've done that research, but I'm interested in everything taken at Wigram, I just need to search the keyword, and there we go. There's 737 of them available at Wigram and 1,100 all up. So it's and in the badges, this is another little section. There's only one for the Wigram badge. And I can also change, I'll go back to here where there's a few, I can change that by file name, ascending, descending, and all of that. If you click on that, you get back to the home page. So that's it. I might, hang on, let me just, what's the serial number of that, Fredo, of that Canberra in your background?
Let me
there
just...
you go, look, there's one there. There's one from that series. That particular one is over Wellington on the, so that Canberra is the one that we have in our collection here. It was a gift to the RNZAF Museum. In response, we gave you guys a Harvard. Generous, eh? And that's another one over Wellington. I know there are others available over Christchurch. So if you just, Fredo typed in there, I just searched by Canberra, and there you go, they're both there. So if you wanted to use that, that's fine. If you want to find some others, if you want me to find some others, you can select, pardon me, so I do a bulk select. Down the bottom here, got 4 files, and I can download all 4 files. It downloads it as a zip, but that's easy to unzip in your own file structure. But I don't want those 4, I'll just clear them all. So that's it. There's quite a nice one of the Canberra and the SS Canberra. So I think they did that for purely publicity reasons at the time. So I might stop sharing now. I'll reshare if I need to, but I will open things up to questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. That's a brilliant presentation. And Michelle as well, thank you very much. So on behalf of everyone, before I open up the questions, thank you. It's fantastic to see the insights from what you have in your museum. And yes, Matthew, you are, as we call it, a one-arm wallpaper hanger. You've done a fantastic job. So well done. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open it up to questions. But firstly, I suppose I'm going to throw it out there. Matthew, you gave us a teaser. You said you didn't want to labour the point about colorization. Please, labour ahead. Give us your views on colorization.
I'm not a fan of it. I guess partly because I'm more of a traditionalist in this. A large chunk of my reasoning is that I work in a museum, and my job is to preserve the artifacts, in this case photographs, in the condition in which they were captured. Again, in this case, photographs. It would be like saying I have a Grecian urn, but I don't like the colours on it. I'll just give it another paint job just to make it look pretty. You know, the images were captured in black and white because the technology was black and white. Now, these people, for a start, I can spot them a mile away, but they also don't necessarily get it right. And one of the things I'm scared of is that people in the future will see these colorized photos and think, oh, that's the color of their flying overalls or something. But it may be that they got that piece of information wrong. And the most recent example of that was some New Zealand pilots in the Pacific, and one of them was wearing an overall, and he had a web belt and holster and ammunition pouch and things on around his waist. Now, the person who did the colorizing colored the belt and holster and those things, he colored them the light tan of the Army colors. Well, that's just simply incorrect. The Air Force had blue webbing up in the Pacific. Now, that's just plain out wrong, and you can't tell me that that's a good use or that's a good telling of history when you're getting things factually incorrect.
Okay, Matthew, that sort of confirms some of the concerns we have, and we've had lots of discussions. And I suppose, to put it briefly, if we always have the fear that if we put a colorized photo into a book, there are so many experts out there that people lose sight of the forest for the trees. And so you lose the bang of the whole book because people start arguing about one particular photo. So,
and in the aviation game, people tend to be very knowledgeable, but also very forward with their opinions.
never.
I absolutely agree with what you are doing about that, because once the colorized version gets out, and there are so many mistakes, modern day people seem to pick up the colorized one as the truth, and it may very well not be. So I entirely agree with your position.
Absolutely. Now there is a, I guess there's a caveat on that, and that is hand-colored prints that were done at the time. Now I would reproduce that faithfully, but in my caption I will say hand-colored, and I'm not guaranteeing the accuracy of the color. All I'm saying is that we have a hand-colored print. In my presentation, one of the slides was a color photograph of a 75 Squadron Lancaster, which is extremely rare. Now, I can assure you that that one has not been colorized. It is from original Kodachrome color slide film. So that one is a genuine example.
Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before I pass over to the first question, which will be from Phil Varborough, if anyone has any questions, just go into the chat and just say, if you can make a note that you have a question there, and that way I can sequence them from there rather than trying to look across the multiple screens, just watch hands going up. So Phil, your question, please.
Thanks, Fredo, and what a fascinating presentation. I'm Phil Varborough from the Airways Museum in Melbourne. And insofar as we have anything, I suppose I'm the image manager, your equivalent. Just as an aside, I have a diametrically opposed view about colorized images, but I won't argue my case here. What I was really interested in is what size do you scan your images at? And am I right in thinking that that photo-aware program will automatically resize down for web display?
Yes, that's right. I upload the original file that I capture on the scanner or the camera, depending on what it is. So it holds the best resolution, and in part of it, I'm not sure that you can do it through the public interface, but I certainly know if you log in, you can actually choose what size and resolution and file type you download it as. So let's say Michelle wanted something for Facebook, and she sees one there, she can download just a small JPEG and it'll come out at, you know, a few 100K, which is fine for Facebook. There is also another function which we haven't actually used an awful lot, but it is, you can actually automatically squirt things across to Facebook or social media. So you could tell it, you know, these 10 photos, and it will do them automatically over the next 10 weeks or whatever it might be. There's a lot of functionality which I haven't used yet, but that's just another one. As far as resolution goes, part of the specifics that I use have the legacy of doing this all from behind the defense firewall. Now, in those days, I didn't have an awful lot of storage space, and I knew I would never get a lot of storage space. When we originally did that image browser, we only scanned low resolution files. It was only ever an access, and we not for the life of us did we think that, you know, people would never want prints again. You know, it was only ever a finding aid. So what I do is 400 DPI with the long side at around about 24-ish centimeters. I'm not sure what that is in pixels, but that will result in being able to print it out quite comfortably at A3, and it results in a black and white. I convert all my monochrome images to black and white files, to grayscale files. They come out at about 5 megabytes roughly, and color files come out at anywhere from 10 to 20 megabytes. So I know that those details aren't in line with the full-on international standards, but they work for me, and they work for 99% of what people want those images for.
So am I right in thinking that you only store or keep one base image? You don't have multiple sizes?
Yes, and that goes up to PhotoWare.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah. So there's kind of a side project on at the moment about making object photos available to the public. This is something where this is sort of a secondary project. We may do something slightly different there, but at the moment, this is for the effectively 2D image collection. And I'm just going to say there, and this is a real museumy thing, but the Air Force negative collection is not technically part of the museum collection, and any software we've had have been purchased by Defence to access the Defence collection, and we have, as a museum, have lumped in the museum collection. So we have Vernon for a collection, but none of those negatives appear in Vernon. So there's a real fine sort of point there, and those of you who are museum types will understand what I'm talking about there.
All right. So the next question I have is from Lloyd Knight.
Oh, hi. Just by coincidence, I just looked up in my old logbook, and I saw that between the 7th and the 10th of June 1964, I was at the School of Air Navigation at East Sale. I was the adjutant at the time, but I crewed a Dakota, one of two, that went to Ohio on the final NavX for the advanced navigation course. I was wondering if anybody happened to photograph those two aircraft, A65-26 and A65-84, between the 7th and 10th of June. Would that show up in your archives?
Possibly.
I don't want to look it up, but I'm just wondering, is that sort of thing?
Yeah, my answer is possibly. Now, the stuff that hasn't been digitized is all only in analog handwritten registers. So really, I'll have to sit down and have a look. And you can see behind me, that bookcase behind me is all of my negative registers, and there's another 3 shelves below that as well.
Yeah.
So what I would recommend you do is send me an email, and you can do that through the website, with the date, particularly the date, because it's a chronological thing, the date and location, and I will see what I can find.
Okay.
That's all I can promise at this point, and that's good because it's another one to add to my inquiry statistics spreadsheet.
I made another little observation on that trip. I noted that Ohio is the only Air Force base in the world that gets its milk from bulls.
Yeah, correct.
Locals would know what that means.
Yeah, locals do know what that
means. The name of the
means.
local town.
All right. I'll pass the next question across to Andrew Wangler. Over to you.
Thanks, Fredo. Firstly, Matthew, magnificent job. Epic task you've undertaken. You've done a fantastic job. And I must admit, whilst you were speaking, I went down the rabbit hole onto the website and was a couple of steps ahead of you. So there's one photo in there in particular that I'm just going to mention to you in a minute. The museum itself as well, Michelle, fantastic. I'm married to a Kiwi, so I spend a bit of time over there, and I'm waiting for the bubble to open so we can get back. But a few years back, I did drag the children around my aviation tour of New Zealand. So we visited Wigram, down to Wanaka, we did a marker, even did Motat to the Lancaster up there, and was lucky enough to have a private tour of Sir Peter Jackson's hangar at Masterton, in which, ironically, he's got one of the original Chitty Chitty Bang Bangs from the movie. I guess it had wings that folded out, so it's got an aviation angle to it. And maybe if we do colorise pictures, we better use Sir Peter Jackson, because I did think he did a fantastic job with his movie in World War II. So yeah, what I wanted to say though is when you opened up that page of RAAF photos, one photo in particular jumped out, or was two actually, of an unknown Australian pilot former colleague of mine, great mate of mine, actually having a bit of some health issues at the moment. But if I can PM you, I can give you all his name and details to fill in. It was a Flight Lieutenant Steve Baker. It was an Ahakia pilot. And yeah, you opened up that page and I just went, wow. Yes.
That's absolutely fine. You know, I get people giving me names all the time, and which is good because, you know, I can't be expected to know everything. So give me the information and I'll add it in. No problems at all.
I'll PM you right now. But no, look, fantastic job, fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Okay.
So Matthew, I suppose that question then, or to follow on from that point that Wang was making, how do you go with people providing feedback for your photos, the images you've digitized? Do you find there's debate that creates sometimes?
I'll say I have a slow but steady stream of emails coming in saying, I know the person in that photo, or, you know, that was at this place or the other, you know, so giving me information, which is fine. And I generally, I'll generally have a look at it, consider it, and, you know, if it sounds plausible or if I can back it up from the research collection here, I'll make that change.
Yep.
There's a discussion website in New Zealand called Pro Boards. I'm not exactly sure what the thing is, but it's just all about New Zealand military aviation. They have created their own board devoted to my image database. It's called RNZAF Photo Gold. So there has been some chit chat about that, but not really about arguing about, you know, the color of the spinner of a Mustang or anything like that. It's more about, you know, hey, remember this guy, wasn't he great, type thing. Okay. Or you know, have a look at this photo. I've just found this photo. That's really great. I keep out of that. I'll say entirely now, but because I'm not a member, I can't contribute to it. But I have emailed the administrator of it, because there was someone picked up on something and made a comment on there which was just simply incorrect, and so I just had to say something. So he corrected that, which was fine. One final thing, Wang, you said about Peter Jackson's colorization of photographs. He had a Great War exhibition in New Zealand where he had a wall of backlit colorized World War I photographs. Now, I know for a fact that he got or his team got some of the information wrong, in that some of the color of webbing, for example, just wrong, too green, you know. So just because you got all the money in the world doesn't mean to say you can get things factually correct. So it's an area that which makes me uneasy, put it that way.
Matthew, I suppose just to add there, one of the sources we are currently using for imagery is obviously the Australian War Memorial. The RAF Museum is fantastic for giving us imagery when they're not in lockdown, unfortunately. But we have the Australian War Memorial and also the State Library of Victoria, and they suffer the consequences of the Australian War Memorial are very protective. So even when we identify photos, imagery is back to front, and obviously back to front, all the wrong details, it's very hard and a very long process to get them to change what they have. And the State Library of Victoria, I think I'll come back in my next life and just volunteer to help caption all their imagery. Fantastic photos, but my God, they've got some bizarre captions on it. The next question is from Graham Aspinall.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks to Michelle and Matthew for great presentations. And congratulations, Matthew, on the work you're doing and will continue to do. I think it's just inspirational to all of us. Just one quick comment about colorization. Yeah, some of the colorization I've seen, particularly World War II images, is, yeah, you need to be very cautious. Some of it looks close or authentic, and some of it is just plain wrong. So, yeah, you have to be very cautious about that particular area. Just a quick question, Matthew. It's a bit of an indirect question related to today's presentation, but the last time I was in Wigram was in 2016. And I visited the museum. At that time, some of the display spaces were being used by other community groups because of the damage sustained in the earthquakes in Christchurch. I was just wondering, for my curiosity, has that space been taken back by the museum for display purposes, or is it still being used, you know, for other purposes by other community groups?
Yes, we've taken it back. That was probably in the area in the back of what we call the Therese Angelo wing, named after, I mentioned her, she was the original, or my original research officer who got the image browser underway. Then she was director. She sadly passed away a couple of years ago now. So we renamed the new building after her. So at the back of that, yes, there was collections from Canterbury Museum and Littleton Museum mainly, but there were other smaller ones. That has been taken back to as our reserve collection area. I will say though that I think we've got a small amount from Littleton Museum. Michelle may correct me, but we may have a small amount from Littleton Museum still here in one of our other hangars, just tucked away in the corner. But it is only a small amount.
Yeah, I know it's at. Sorry, Michelle, I'll let you talk.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Graham, did you? We also had our technical conservation workshop, which was given over to those groups as well. And that was quite a significant space that we delayed occupation of, so that those groups could have the chance to get back on their feet and sort out their collections after the earthquake. So yes, we certainly have taken that back.
Yeah,
now.
I did notice in the main museum, just sort of left of the main entrance, just off from where the Oxford and the Mackie were displayed, there was like a big area there that seemed to be used for conferences and stuff. And I was very fortunate. When I was there, I took the behind the scenes tour of the the storage collection and in one of the adjoining hangars, and I found that very, very interesting. And I think you guys, for a small organisation, are doing wonderful things, and I think it's an example for other museums and groups to follow too. So well done to Michelle and Matthew and your team.
Thank you.
Great. The next question I have is from Roderick Smith, and Roderick has a question on fire and climate security. I hope that means in relation to the museum and not just the world in general. Roderick.
Right, so thanks. I pressed the space bar and nothing happened, but I've unmuted. Now, I go to New Zealand a lot, toured South Island with a cinema group where we looked at 6 surviving cinemas in Christchurch. 5 of them were lost in the earthquake. Did you lose anything from any of your own collection at the time? That's a quick question.
In short, no. We in the photographic archive, I was quietly pleased with myself because I had 1 tin of aerial film fall down, and which was very good. In other areas, we had shelves of objects topple over. We didn't have any serious damage. In the atrium at the time, we had suspended aircraft, and the Vampire started swinging quite wildly, and it banged its the tip of one of its booms on the concrete pillar. So we put a small object label beside it and left it there, which was quite fun.
And then to follow from that, we've had museum collections in Victoria lost with bushfires, and another one in Essendon lost completely when the building in which it was housed went. What do you have in the way of fire protection for your negative and photographic collection? And equally, one from Michelle, what do you have in the way of climate control for protecting your aircraft in that beautiful building?
Okay, well, perhaps I'll start. All of the buildings that the museum occupies at the moment were all ex-Air Force buildings from Base Wigram. So that meant that they all have sprinkler fire suppression in them. So it's not necessarily ideal. I mean, we could go into a debate about what the best fire suppression systems are, but we have water sprinklers, in short. We also have fully climate controlled spaces in the written archive in this building. The small object store doesn't have climate control as such, but it's less prone to climate change, shall we say. and maybe Michelle, I'll just jump in here and say that the main museum areas have climate controlled areas, and the main display hangar, which is not, has very good insulation in the roof, so that it stays constant all the time, pretty much.
Yeah, on a very basic level, we try to ensure that nothing is left outside, because, you know, we have one aircraft in our collection in particular that, you know, in previous times was left outside for a number of years, and it's really suffered for it. So, you know, getting everything under cover is just the biggest win, and the best way to, you know, to halt deterioration. But we also, as I said, have a, you know, a process of detailed inspections that we, you know, we cycle through all of the aircraft to make sure we're tracking any signs of deterioration. But yeah, we do try to keep our conditions as stable as possible, because it's the big fluctuations in temperature and humidity that are the, you know, are the problem. So yeah, as best we can, we keep everything stable.
I think Emily could probably comment on the challenges of having aircraft parked outside has for the RAF Museum, but that's probably a different story, isn't that right, Emily?
Thanks.
Yep, she's signaling she doesn't want to go there. The next question I have is from Lindsay and Joan Howe, and the question that this has been posted online is PhotoWare suitable for a small collection of, say, 8,000 images, and is there any idea of cost?
Yes, it would be suitable for a smaller collection. The cost may be prohibitive to a smaller institution. I mean, I think it's you're probably looking at somewhere around $20,000 or something like that. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's, you know, it's more than $10,000, less than $30,000, somewhere in there, you know. So it can be quite expensive. You know, funding is always a good thing to get something like that. But that said, there are some, or we in New Zealand have some options available which are actually free of charge for a up to a maximum number of records. So you know, there may be another system out there which you may be able to put your 8,000 on for little to no cost. The one in New Zealand is E-Hive, and that Simon's looked at it, but I'm not hugely familiar with it. But it's just a way of putting up collections for very cheap.
Okay. I now have a question that's come in from James Kitely, and I think he wants to follow up on the questions from Matthew. So James?
Thanks very much. Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. I thought it was a terrific presentation, Matthew. I don't think we've met on my visits or chats, but really appreciate it. Really great insight to what you guys have been doing there. Just been talking to Phil Varbray. Incidentally, Phil and I and another team are organising a conference next year, Aviation Cultures, in March. It's an online conference. Watch your social media. Fredo is a member of the team too, and we will be telling people about it a bit more when we can. We've just been chatting back and forth. Maybe we should talk about colorization at the conference and have a sealed room for people to go into and fight over it. I just wanted to pick up on the colorization, Matthew. You made it. I'm really in agreement with you. Phil makes very good points for the other side, I feel. But you picked up a really good point. I feel very strongly that one of the problems with colorization is it obscures existing genuine color. We actually have World War I genuine color photographs. They're very rare. There are a couple of different processes that Paget System and another one I can't remember offhand. And they're incredibly valuable because they are genuine color pictures taken in that era. And as we all know, there's a bit from World War II, and that stuff's being sort of overwhelmed by the colorization process. But you made the excellent point, I thought, about period tinted, which is another element that disappears into that mix with the sort of greater flooding of colorization occurring now. And I think that is a danger and a pity. But the question I had for you really, going in a different direction, unless you want to pick up on the colorization, I'm sure we could do the whole thing about that. But your story is much important and much bigger than just that. You touched briefly in your talk about the surprises of opening up the access to using the photographs. And I was wondering if you could just go a bit more into that and a bit broader, because I think it's a big argument that a lot of museums need to be able to advance to de-restrict. Places like the Imperial War Museum, the Australian War Memorial we just mentioned a couple of times, are very difficult to use because they have restrictions in what they will share. They often expect you to pay. In contrast, say, to the United States Air Force Museum, which is basically free slather. Their stuff's all over the place in terms of quality, but if you can find it and they put it up, you can use it. And they've been doing that for decades. You've clearly transitioned from a relatively little used in the wider social media spectrum setup to where you're clearly getting some fascinating usage, and some of it clearly surprising. Can you expand on that a bit, perhaps, and maybe Michelle too?
Yeah, there's a couple of points there, and with the American, anything created by the US government has no copyright on it at all. So there is no restrictions like that. I think the only thing that they expect is to cite the source, and I think the photographer. So everything on the NASA website, you can download full resolution files. It's great. It really is good. But for our photos and talking about the copyright laws in New Zealand, and again, you could have a whole nother session on copyright law. But broadly speaking, anything before 1944, if it was created by the government, it's out of copyright. So actually, you would have to have a pretty smart lawyer to make an argument about charging people for something that effectively they own anyway, because it was created by the Crown using taxpayer money, and then you're not actually letting the taxpayer have that asset back. So there are some. I think there's some ethical issues there. Again, I could go on. I think that the Imperial War Museum is too guarded of things which copyright has expired on. I think probably the Australian War Memorial was the same. I think they see it as an income stream. When we started looking at this, our director said, well, how much money do we make out of that each year? And to be honest, I'd never even thought of it. I've kept spreadsheets for years, but I've never actually sat down and added up how much money I make out of photos. And it came out to only about $5,000. She said, don't even worry about it. It's not even worth our effort. And the level of administration that's removed from the organisation is probably more of a saving than we would have made out of carrying on charging for those images. I originally, when I started here, I was very young, I was very green. I picked up the RNZAF photographer's pricing schedule, and I just went with that. And it turns out that probably 10 years before we went free, the Air Force photographers on the official side of things had gone to the Creative Commons model years ago and weren't charging anyway. And it just, they hadn't told me, I just wasn't aware of that. So, yeah, I think that, and another issue there is that, let's say we're still charging for it, and I sell you a file, or you buy the rights for a file, and even if I add metadata to that file saying this is still in copyright, effectively you can copy and do whatever you want with it anyway. You effectively lose control of that image as soon as it leaves your computer. So, you're kind of banging your head up against a brick wall at a certain point, if you're trying to do that. You've only really relying on the honest few to pay for them. So let's just not worry about it.
The question of purchasing imagery from the War Memorial, Matthew, is very touchy with us in that the imagery that the War Memorial has, which is invariably provided to them by the Department of Defence, but they still charge Defence $40 Australian per image to get it back as a handling fee. Now that's a pittance of what they charge the average civilian out there. But then every time we use that image, we buy it once, but every time we then use it, we have to then report back and tell them what book it's going in for their accountability and reportability to their board. So you're right, there is a money-making aspect to it as well, which every time we have to pay for a range of 20 or 30 images, we shiver.
Yeah, that's right. And I know where they're coming from, and that's a decision by their institution to go that way. Handling fee is just another way of saying it's a charge. You know, we're not charging you for the photo because we can't, but we're charging you to pay someone to do that. It's again, we could discuss this one topic for another hour. You know, but I think that that the goodwill that what we've done with our image database, the goodwill that's generated for the museum is you can't calculate it by dollars and cents. So therefore, you know, the money people need to put a figure on it.
Yep.
But if the result is something that you can't put a dollar figure on, then it simply doesn't get added to the mix. And I think that's the problem. If you need to be able to quantify it so that the accountants can say, well, this is what we've done. But you know, you imagine if the Australian War Memorial put 1/10 of their photo collection out for, you know, as I have. You know, imagine the uses that everybody would have. Imagine the places that you know, there's no point in keeping something if it's too expensive for anybody to use it. What's the point? You know, that's just, you're putting a barrier in everybody's way. And, you know, I don't know about Australia, but in New Zealand, we have a museum's Aotearoa code of ethics. Now, what's the point, you know, ethically, what's the point in preserving this stuff as best and as well as you can if you're not going to let anybody use it, and, you know, or you're going to, you know, you've got this massive price barrier. It's just, I just don't get it. And more museums are jumping on this bandwagon. As I said, Digital New Zealand has something like 30 million assets available for free.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I was just noticing there, Matthew, while you were talking, Brett Marshall, your boss, is sitting there going, he's checking, he's looking at his budget figures. Yeah, he's nodding his head.
I didn't know he was here. I might have been a bit more polite.
Yeah, just to come back on that, a terrific answer, but one bit that we didn't get to, which maybe sits better with Michelle. I really appreciate Matthew, lovely, and I think a lot of people are on that page, and we need to be able to push through from the archives and the museums to the accountants that there are benefits that may not be obviously tangible, but, you know, if we're costing a lot in a museum to charge a small amount of money to share a photograph that doesn't go very far, then that's not a good. And I think your point, which I just pick up and re-emphasize, of, you know, the saving in making it simpler and more accessible is often a big saving to everybody's benefit. But Michelle, could you perhaps touch on a couple of examples where having that more open access has had a surprising or anticipated outcome for the museum?
Well, I think the example that Matthew shared as part of his presentation of the little story, you know, that has been put together, or the blog that's been put together about the convalescent depot, is just one example of many. But I, you know, from my work, because obviously I administer the museum's social media accounts, you know, from what I see of our images being shared so widely, I mean, to me, that is absolute proof. Well, I mean, the fact is they're not being shared just by aviation heritage groups. They're being shared, you know, by New Zealand history groups. And, you know, I just love seeing that kind of thing, because that really makes the point that this is part of our nation's heritage. It's not just, you know, for people with a connection to the Air Force or, you know, interested in aviation. This is New Zealand history. And, you know, as the National Museum of, you know, our nation's Air Force, you know, that's all we can hope for, really, is to be seen in that light. So in terms of surprising examples, you know, I don't know if I'll probably think of a few things after we log off. But yeah, I mean, I like I say, I see things popping up all the time, and as Matthew pointed out, the fact that they're actually crediting us, you know, because that used to be a constant source of frustration in the past before we had this online collection. You know, would recognise them as photos from our collection, but you know, people were either claiming them as their own, or they just weren't referencing them at all. So you know, that just builds on itself, and people get familiar with what's available. And yeah, I mean, the colorizations are going nuts at the moment, but you know, I'm not going to necessarily weigh into that debate. I think, you know, broadly speaking, my feelings align with Matthew's, but with my visitor hat on, my communications or, you know, visitor experience hat on, I can see that it shows people engaging with our collection, you know, whether or not we agree with, you know, the accuracy of it or the ethics of it. The fact is they're using the collection and they're engaging with it. And yeah, on that level, it's a positive thing.
Okay, so the next questions I've got are Anna Goebbels. Anna has some insights into E-Hive. So perhaps, Anna, do you want to have a quick mention of that?
Hi, had no intention of speaking, but look, I work in museums and archives with a whole range of different collections, and I have been using E-Hive. I can say that, yes, it is a benefit. It's very cost effective. You can choose how much you want to upload, how much it's going to cost, and it essentially just gets your collection up online and accessible to everyone. So it is owned by Vernon Collection Management System, which I believe your system, you know, that's what you use at the museum. So yeah, very easy to use, highly recommend it. New Zealand based, is also able to be harvested by Trove. So yeah.
Okay. So perhaps if anyone's got any questions on it, they can contact you directly, Anna.
Happy to help.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. The next question might be the last one, is from Adam Lunny.
Hello,
Adam.
thank you, Matthew and Michelle. I'm really looking forward to coming over to Kiwiland and going through your archives. I did just want to say that in the last 12 months with an Australian museum that I won't name, I wanted to see what they had in their archives. So I sent them an email, said, this is who I am, this is what I'm looking for, do you have anything I can see? And the answer was no, you can't look. I also said, can I give a public talk? And they said, oh no, we're not set up for public talks. And this is a museum. I later found out that that museum hosts a monthly historical society meeting. That to me would be a form of public talk. So I was quite annoyed with them. And yet, when I started my Anzacs over Normandy project, for want of a better title, I thought, I met Michelle in Canberra. She works at the museum. I'll ask her if they can help and what they've got. And from the first email, what do you need? What do you want? How can we help? When are you coming to visit? How long would you like to stay? Positive, 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 positive. So I'm really looking forward to coming to New Zealand next year and to meet all of you again and see where I can get, because it's so supportive. The Kiwis just do it so well.
All right, well, thank you for that comment.
We're looking forward to having you too.
All right, we're getting close to 11:30 now, so if I don't see anyone else has got any other questions out there. If anyone does, one last question. Any hands up? Anyone?
I might just say there that just to follow on from Michelle, I think engagement is the key word. It's a part of the collection, or the photographs is a part of the collection which is not easily accessed anyway, apart from the few which are on display or maybe go up on the website or whatever. But it's people engaging with the collection, engaging with the greater story, and that's something which we have experienced a lot more recently, just with people coming back to us saying, I love it, you know, I've gone down a few memory trails there, and here's a name, you know, and that's enough. That's fine.
That's fantastic. All right, so I'm going to wrap up now. There's no further questions, but before I wrap up, I just want to do a bit of an apology. At the start, I mentioned Kristen Alexander's presentation next month. I was working off a previous version of the title, so I'll just read this out. The title of her webinar, which is on the 4th of December, is Winning the Battle of the Wits in the Barbed Wire Battleground, Australian Airmen of Stalag Luft 3. So Kristen's going to explore and discuss how Australian Airmen of Stalag Luft 3 energetically overcame the challenges of captivity to remain active servicemen in the barbed wire battleground by reinforcing their military identity. So really strongly recommend anyone who has a chance to participate in that webinar. And a reminder that the night before Thursday, the 3rd of December, we're doing the book launch of Armageddon and Nokra. So at this point, I'd just like to everyone give a round of applause to Matthew and Michelle. Thank you very much. Fantastic webinar. And I could just ask, when we close off this in a minute, if Matthew, Michelle, Emily, and Imogen could stay online, we could just have a quick 5-minute chat. Michelle, is that okay?
Yep.
All right, that's fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your participation. We had 40 participants and really greatly appreciated. So again, well done to Matthew and Michelle for leading the way. And it's great to have our Kiwi cousins over the ditch supporting us with this forum. So thank you, everyone. All right, goodbye.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Michelle. Thanks, Matthew.